You're listening to Rolling Recklessly, the podcast where dice hit the floor, paint gets spilled, and no game ever goes exactly as planned. I'm Grizzly, and here we dive headfirst into Warhammer, tabletop gaming, and the beautiful mess that is the hobby life. From epic crits to absolute disasters, we'll cover it all. So grab your minis, roll with me, and let's get reckless. Welcome back to Rolling Recklessly, the podcast where we dive into all things Warhammer Age of Sigmar. From epic lore and battlefield strategies to hobby updates and community stories. I'm your host Robert, aka Grizzly, and we're branching out into a faction focus that's rooted deep into the mortal realms. This episode is all about one of the most unique and thematic and personally meaningful factions in Age of Sigmar, the Sylvaneth. These are Alarielle's children, ancient spirits of the forest bound by bark, branch, and leaf, who fight to protect the natural order of the realms. Their roots run deep, their branches reach far, and even in the darkest of times, they remind us of new growth is always possible. We'll talk about their origins and lore, their roles in the battles like the Realmgate Wars and beyond, what makes them starting out as a painting and hobby project, and how they play on the tabletop in both Spearhead and full-size games. And along the way, I'll share my own journey with the Sylvaneth, because that was my very first army that hooked me to Age of Sigmar, and to this day, they remain my favorite. So grab your dice, gather your Wyldwoods, and let's leaf through the story of the Sylvaneth together. When we talk about the Sylvaneth, we're talking about more than just an army. We're talking about the living spirit of the mortal realms themselves. They aren't just warriors made of bark and branch. They're the echoes of ancient forests given form. Guardians of nature who fight to keep the cycles of life, death, and rebirth all in balance. Their roots trace all the way back to the world that was. Back then, the ever-clean Alarielle ruled as the goddess of life. Surrounded by her kin, Dryads, treemen, and forest spirits, when the world fell apart in the end times, her spirit endured. She carried the essence of her people into this new reality of called the mortal realms. In the Age of Myth, when Sigmar's pantheon strode the realms, Alarielle flourished. She seeded the vast forest, pouring her soul into every leaf and branch. From those sacred groves rose the Sylvaneth, spirits bound by living bodies of bark and vine, connected to the pulse of Ghyran itself. They were not mortals reforged like Stormcast, but living extension of nature's will. But in the age of chaos that brought devastation, Nurgle, the god of rot and decay, set his eyes on Ghyran. To him, the realm of life was his ultimate prize, a place where endless growth could truly fuel endless corruption. The Sylvaneth became his chosen prey. Groves burned, sacred trees were defiled, and their numbers dwindled. Alarielle herself fell into despair, retreating into her hidden soul pod form, her grief so heavy that she withdrew from the war itself. This is where one of my favorite moments in their story begins. The Lady of Vines, one of Alarielle's most trusted lieutenants, a being woven from her very essence, led a caravan of Sylvaneth alongside their Stormcast allies. They were being hunted relentlessly by Torglug the Despised, a corrupted champion of Nurgle. Torglug was once a great warrior of the Order, but Nurgle had twisted him into a monster as he pursued Alarielle with a single purpose, to claim her soul for his festering god. The chase was brutal. Wave after wave of Nurgle's plague-ridden horde crashed against their fleeing Sylvaneth in the Stormcast. The Lady of Vines fought desperately to protect her queen, holding the line as corruption pressed from all sides. The caravan seemed doomed, their sacred goddess still weak and invulnerable. And then, the sky split open. A blazing comet of celestial energy tore down from the heavens, and at its heart was the Celestant-Prime, Sigmar's chosen weapon. Descending like a thunderbolt, he smashed into Nurgle's ranks with divine fury. His arrival turned the tide of battle. The Prime carved through the Rotbringers, scattering Torglug's warriors, and bought the Sylvaneth the time that they needed to rally. In that moment, what felt like certain extinction blossomed into a renewed hope. That battle was not just a clash of armies, it was a turning point. Alarielle, carried by the devotion of her children and the interventions of Sigmar's champion, was reborn. No longer the passive goddess of life and growth, she returned in her war aspect, mounted upon the colossal Wardroth beetle, brimming with fury and ready to unleash the full wrath of Ghyran against chaos. From that point on, the Sylvaneth were no longer scattered spirits fighting a losing battle. They became a unified force, an army rooted in vengeance as much as in renewal. Their story has since become one of resilience, standing against Nagash's endless dead in the Soul Wars, resisting the earthquakes and destructions of Kragnos and the Broken Realms, and continuing the fight wherever the balance of nature is threatened. At their heart, the Sylvaneth embody both sides of nature. They are the gentle beauty of the growth of rebirth, but they are also the savage thorn and root in the forest that is under attack. They bend, but they do not break. They are the living proof that in the mortal realms, the land itself will rise to fight back when wounded. Now that we've discussed the roots of their story, let's branch into how the Sylvaneth grow into the hobby desk. One of the things that makes the Sylvaneth so special to me is how much their models reflect their lore. They aren't just warriors with swords or axes, they're living forests brought to life in miniature form. Every sculpt feels like it carries a piece of Ghyran in its base. They have a full range of iconic kits. You've got Dryads, the rank-and-file forest spirits who can swarm the tables, towering tree lords, bringing ancient might to the battle, while the Kurnoth hunters are perhaps the most beloved units in their line, versatile and imposing with their bows, scythes, or swords. And of course, there's Alarielle, the Everqueen herself, one of the most striking centerpiece models in all of Age of Sigmar, mounted on her colossal war draft beetle. Hobby-wise, the Sylvaneth are a painter's playground. Their sculpts are organic, full of bark textures, flowing vines, and spirit glow details. They're forgiving for new painters. Dry brushing bark or layering leaves gets you tabletop ready results pretty quickly. They're also scaled beautifully for advanced painters who want to push the shading, glowing spirit effects, or even seasonal theming. For me, what makes them especially great is they're approachable for newer painters and rewarding for veterans. Honestly, the Sylvaneth are one of the armies that can look good with relatively simple techniques. Even just contrast paints can make the bark and leaves pop in a way that makes them feels natural and dynamic. That's how I approach mine. Fairly straightforward methods, but the models themselves do so much of the work. That's exactly what I've leaned to with my own Sylvaneth. I've painted and fully based most of my army with tufts, plants, and stones that bring the living forest vibes to the table. Each unit is themed to a different season. My Kurnoth hunters come in two different sets, painted, a winter-themed squad with scythes, and a summer-themed squad with swords. I've also got another two I have to paint, another set of swords and a set of bows that are still waiting there. My Dryads are, for the most part, fully painted and based, while my Tree Remnants are split into seasonal hosts, one autumn set with the fiery oranges and reds, and one spring set with bright greens that blooms. As for my centerpiece models, I'm especially proud of my Spirit of Durthu. He's one of my favorite models in the game, both visually and on the table. The blend of menace and majesty in the sculpt just embodies what Sylvaneth are all about. My Kurnoth hunters are another favorite. They've always stand out when they hit the table. Currently, with my Sylvaneth, I'm still working through my other heroes. I have Drycha Hamadreth, one of the wildest and most unique models in the entire game. I also have a Tree Lord Ancient. He's mostly painted now, which I plan to finish with a spring theme. And then I have my Alarielle underway. Her beetle is partially painted while she herself is primed and waiting. And last up, I have the Warsong Revenant, one of the most beautiful hero sculpts in the line. He's also primed and he's ready for work. The Sylvaneth range is really rewarding, putting your own spin on things. For me, the seasonal theme makes the army feel alive. Every unit looks like it comes from a different grove of Ghyran, each bringing its own character to the fight. When they're all on the table together, it feels like a living forest in miniature form. That's what I love most about the Sylvaneth on the hobby side. You're not just painting soldiers, you're painting seasons, spirits, and an entire ecosystem. Every model is a chance to bring a little bit of Ghyran to life. With the paint dry and the tufts glued, let's see how these spirits take root on the battlefield. When it comes to the tabletop, the Sylvaneth are one of the most unique factions in Age of Sigmar. They don't just march forward like a traditional army, they reshape the battlefield itself. Their forest, their teleportation, and their hit-and-run style, on top of healing, all of that combined makes them feel like no other army in the game. The first and most iconic rule they bring is the Awakened Wyldwoods. Being able to summon forest on the battlefield is more than just cool thematically, it's tactical. These forests give Sylvaneth places to teleport to, hide behind, and can be used to control movement. It's like you're playing with the board itself, always reshaping how the game flows. The Sylvaneth armies thrive on mobility. They're not the toughest faction in the game, and they don't often win straight slugfest. Instead, they excel at striking where the enemy is weak, grabbing objectives, and then disappearing before retaliation can land. Their units can often have abilities that let them move, teleport, or reposition in ways that other factions just can't keep up with. It makes them a nightmare for slower opponents who can't match that speed. But that mobility comes at a cost. Sylvaneth can feel fragile. They rely on positioning, timing, and using their terrain to their advantage. If you misplace a unit or lose control of your Wyldwoods, the army can unravel quickly. They aren't as forgiving as armies like the Stormcast or Nurgle, where raw durability can carry you through mistakes. On the battlefield, different units serve distinct different roles. Dryads, surprisingly durable for their cost when fighting in their forest, they're not heavy hitters, but they can bog down an enemy and hold a space. Then you've got Tree Revenants. They're tricky skirmish with their ability to teleport, great for objective play and grabbing ground when the enemy least expects it. Next up, we've got Gossamet Archers, mobile units with a 12-inch shot that can flee d6 after shooting. Great for screening and pinning, although they are a little squishy and hit on 4s. After that, we have my favorite battle line, the Kurnoth Hunters, the real muscle of the army. Scythes defend from charges and cleave through armor. Swords are reliable all-arounders with explosive charge damage, and bows give you a ranged punch. Their 5 wound bodies make them durable and anchors in an otherwise fragile army. After that, we have our Revenant Seekers, fast cavalry units for grabbing objectives and passing out a 5-up ward. Great targets for utilizing our strike and fade maneuvers. Now getting into our heroes, we've got our Spirit of Durthu, an absolute monster in melee when supported properly. He hits hardest near the Wyldwoods, making him a true centerpiece, both visually and tactically. Next up, we have Belthanos. He enables 3 units to run and charge. That helps slower units not so reliant on teleporting through the trees to make their damages. After that, we have our Warsong Revenant, the magical backbone of the army, able to pump out mortal wounds in an area where near a forest. He also gives a 6-up ward bubble about 12 inches. And lastly, we have the Everqueen herself, Alarielle. At 680 points, she's a huge investment, but she brings everything. Summoning, healing, powerful spells, and devastating melee on her beetle. She can swing entire games if she's used properly, or flop. In terms of playstyle, the Sylvaneth are often described as a guerrilla army. You pick your battles, punish overextension, and dance around your opponents with teleports and hit and run strikes. They reward careful, patient play, and a good eye for positioning. But on the flip side, they can struggle against armies that ignore their tricks. If your opponent can shut down teleports, burrow in your forest, or flood the board with more bodies than you can handle, Sylvaneth have a hard time clawing back. They're very much a finesse army. When everything clicks, they're unstoppable. When it doesn't, they can fold pretty quickly. For me, the highlights of playing Sylvaneth is when the moment when your opponent thinks that they've got you pinned, and then you step through your Wyldwoods, redeploy half your army, turn the tables. It's satisfying, it feels thematic, and it makes Sylvaneth games some of the most memorable I've ever played. An example of how a game might flow would be Turn 1, the Sylvaneth set the stage. A Wyldwood drops onto the battlefield in a key lane, cutting off enemy movement and giving teleport options. Dryads or Tree Revenants move up the screen, while Kurnoth Hunters hold back, waiting for the right moment. The enemy pushes forward, thinking that they can box you in. Turn 2, the forest comes alive. The Spirit of Durthu and Kurnoth Hunters step through the Wyldwoods, suddenly appearing in enemy flanks. They hit a key unit hard, deleting something off an opponent that thought was safe. Meanwhile, Tree Revenants teleport across the board, grab an unguarded objective, already leaving the opponent forced to pivot and react. Turn 3, the counterattack comes, but Sylvaneth don't stick around. Using teleports and movement tricks, the army withdraws to safer ground, leaving behind screens of Dryads to slow the enemy down. While the opponent wastes time breaking through, the Sylvaneth keeps scoring on objectives and tactics. Then by turn 4 or 5, it's the late game. The board is already littered with Wyldwoods. The Sylvaneth are everywhere and nowhere at once. Durthu is still a threat, cutting down elite units near the forest, while the Warsong Revenant pumps out mortal wounds in the midboard. The opponent is spread too thin, and the Sylvaneth win, not by brute force, but by control, using speed, forest, and precision strikes to outlast and outmaneuver. That's really the Sylvaneth in a nutshell. They're not about meeting the enemy head-on. They're more about growing roots where the enemy least expects it, and then striking like a storm when the time is right. Now, as we wrap up our Sylvaneth spotlight, I think it's worth taking a step back, like looking at the whole forest instead of just one tree. What makes the Sylvaneth so special, it just isn't their rules or their models. It's how they embody the spirit of Age of Sigmar itself. They're a faction that grows, adapts, and changes with the battlefield. They don't win by brute force alone, but by finding the cracks in the enemy's armor, slipping through, and taking root where no one expected it. For me, the Sylvaneth are a reminder that every army in Age of Sigmar is more than just rules and war scrolls. They're stories, and Sylvaneth's story is one of the survival, transformation, and balance. They're nature's duality, life and death, growth and decay, beauty and wrath. As a Sylvaneth player, you really feel that tension. Do you lean into their fragility and play carefully? Or do you risk everything on a bold strike? Every game feels like tending a garden. Sometimes the seeds flourish, sometimes they wither and die, but it's always memorable. And it makes me wonder, where did they grow from here? Will Alarielle's story keep them in the spotlight? Or will the Sylvaneth remain one of the mortal realm's hidden guardians, striking from the woods only when needed? On the table, they demand a similar mindset. You can't just charge in headlong like Oryx and soak damage like Nurgle. You have to think like a tree. Sometimes patience, sometimes striking, always adapting to the light or the shadow of the battlefield. And when it all comes together, there's nothing quite like watching your forest grow across the board while your opponent scrambles trying to keep up. Thank you for joining me today under the canopy for our Sylvaneth episode deep dive. I hope you enjoyed exploring their lore, their place on the battlefield, and what makes them such a unique part of Age of Sigmar. I'd love to hear your own Sylvaneth stories, whether it's a paint scheme you're proud of, a battle you'll never forget, or just why the Forest of Grand inspires you. You can share those with me on Instagram at rolling_recklessly_podcast or by email at rollingrecklesslypodcast@gmail.com. Still have a few more days till the 1st, so don't forget, Nurgling contest is ending then. Go ahead and head over to Instagram and check out for details. Also, now we're live on YouTube. Check out the page where I'll post all episodes over there, and we have some fun content planned as well. I'm excited to share. Until next time, may your crits be high, your paint never dry, and your rolls ever reckless.